is 7:30 p.m. on August 29th, and I have just registered for the Marathon de Medoc, which is happening in 9 days. So this morning I woke up with zero plans to run a marathon in 9 days, let alone a marathon that's going to be serving wine and steak and ice cream. And then about halfway through the day, I got this message from one of my followers that said, "Hey, I just won this free bib to the Marathon de Medoc via Instagram. Do you want it?" And I've chatted with her a bit in the past, so I know she's like a real person. And I said, that feels very last minute. Let me think about it. And she's like, "It's free." And I was like, wow, this is really hard to get access to this race. And when you get access to the race, it's 100 euros. So you know what? Let's make this happen. It's an investment, right? So I'm going to be running a marathon in 9 days. Let's see what happens. So one of the biggest parts about this race is that everybody has to dress to the theme. And the theme this year is Make Your Games. So here are the 3 outfits that I'm going to be considering just right off the top of my head. I may change this as the days go out, but I really don't like buying an outfit just for a one event. I think that's just a waste of materials and it's just not good for the environment. So I'm trying to think of what I already have in my house that can easily be supplemented and turned into an outfit. Make Your Games, New England Patriots. I'm a born and raised New Englander, and football is an awesome game for me, at least. However, I'm not sold on this because, I don't know. I'm just not sold. We're in Europe, we're not in the US. My next option, Paris 2024 Olympic Games. Technically, this is for the Paris Marathon in April, but let's just block that out and pretend it's Olympics, and I'd cover myself in Olympic rings and some body paint. Also, this is technically already a running shirt, so there is some kind of benefit to that. Okay, and my third option, Go Fish, the card game. I can turn this really easily. I can attach it to a running hat. I've done it before. So I'm thinking I could somehow make myself into a literal interpretation of Go Fish. All right, we are 8 days from my next marathon, the Marathon de Medoc. And today I have booked my hotel, my flight, and my train tickets to get to the race. So you might ask, Sadie, if you found out yesterday and you already knew you were very close to traveling, why didn't you book yesterday? Because the Marathon de Medoc, like every other French race, requires that you have a medical certificate that has been filled out by a doctor within the last year. Now, I do have one, luckily, that actually expires just 4 days after this race. So amazing, that wouldn't have worked out otherwise. And I have it from running the semi-marathon or half marathon de Beaujolais, which is another wine marathon in November of every year. I was waiting just to get approval from the race organizers that they were going to be accepting this medical certificate that I had, because it was kind of close to expiring, and technically the wording that the 2 races wanted was slightly different. And I got that validation today that I am officially 100% in. I am good to go. So now I am going to be running the Marathon de Medoc. And so I booked myself a flight, which I'm only arriving the night before. It's not my ideal, but because I'm booking this with literally 1 week before I fly, I decided I'm only gonna spend 2 nights in Bordeaux, and I'm really just there for the race. I'm not gonna do much sightseeing. We'll see what happens on Sunday morning and how I feel, maybe hungover. I also booked myself a hostel, not a hotel, because it was a lot cheaper. Now, the thing about me is I don't like traditional hostels. I'm kind of just past that phase in my life where I just wanna be in a regular bunk bed. So the hostel that I booked for this one does have sliding wood panels, a bit more privacy that I like personally when I'm traveling and staying in hostels. Also for training, I've decided I'm just gonna keep doing my half marathon training plan for my race in October, because there's no way I can train for a marathon in the next 8 days. I'm just kind of polishing up my diet and, getting more into that race mindset with what I can do, stretching more, just trying what I can do, but at the end of the day, I'm not gonna switch my race plan around. When it came time to start planning this trip, the very first thing I had to figure out was if I wanted to stay in Paullaic or Bordeaux. So Paullaic is actually the start and the finish line of the Marathon de Medoc. However, it's a very small village and there's only a couple of hotels. And especially since I only got a bib 9 days in advance, I did end up staying in Bordeaux. In general, you are going to end up staying in Bordeaux for this race. The thing about the starting and the finish line area is that it's not a lot of hotel options, and so they're going to be definitely hiking up those prices for this race. It's super easy though to get from Bordeaux to the race start, and all you have to do is take the train. There was exactly one train that ran that morning that would go on time for the race. You need to be on time, but it worked out. You have to take the 7:30 train, you get there a little after 8:30, and it's about 15-minute walk into the town center. And then I took the 7 p.m. train back to Bordeaux. Now let's talk training. Of course, again, 9 days, couldn't really do much for my training, and I was already training for another half marathon. So I actually pretended this just didn't happen and took a few days off after the race to recover. But if I was training for this and I was not a normal runner, I would train for this like it's a marathon, because it is a marathon. And as this one guy who ran past me around mile 20 said, you know, aside from the wine and the party and the costumes, this is still a marathon. And it was a hilly marathon. So if I had to do it again and I actually had time to train for it, I would train like it's a marathon, especially with that 6.5 hour, 7 hour cutoff time limit. That's not a ton of time to run and drink all of this wine. Most marathons have a cutoff of 6 hours, and that is no wine, you are just focused on running. So when you're approaching this race that has a cutoff time, it's definitely going to be more difficult. In order to better help you prepare, I also wanted to offer some of my own timing details. So I've done one marathon before this, and I finished that marathon in 4 hours and 43 minutes. And my average half marathon finish time is around 2 hours, 2:05 to 2:10 is my average half marathon finish. And in this race, from when I crossed the starting line to when I crossed the finish line, it took me 6 hours and 27 minutes. Now I started about 10 minutes after the first waves went out, but still, that is a full 6.5 hours. I used that entire time up. According to my watch, 5 hours and 15 minutes of moving time. So I added about 1:15 stopping for all the wine stops. Take that time, use it if it can to help you get a sense of what to expect from these races. I didn't take super long breaks at any of the first wine stops, and I also skipped the very first wine stop because I stand by the fact that that one will always be the most crowded in any wine race, and so it's better, especially if you're worried about time, to just skip it. In addition, there are some people who plan on DNFing this race. They know that they're going to get caught by the sweeper bus, but they're just there to see how far into the course they can make it before that sweeper bus catches them. So let's chat about the Expo. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend this Expo as I only got in the night, like literally 10 o'clock the night before this race, which I would never recommend doing. But again, 9 days, you make some exceptions. But here's what I can tell you from watching videos on social media of this race, you know, watching what the Marathon de Medoc was posting. The Expo looks like a blast. And from what I know from my last wine half marathon is you will go to the Expo and they will already be serving the wines. So, you know, prepare to spend a lot of time at this Expo and just have fun. So as I mentioned before, I took the train to Paullaic, and once I arrived, the very first thing I did was find my bib, A, and B, find the bathrooms. Now, I had read online that the bathroom situation was not sufficient for the amount of runners there were. I don't know if they changed something in 2024 or if the woman who wrote that had never run a marathon before, because let me tell you, these were the nicest bathrooms I had ever seen at any starting line of a race. Like, I am talking, they were porta potties, but they were porta potties that had running water in sinks. Yeah, there was like a 10-minute line, but I'm used to waiting 10-15 minutes just to, you know, go pee in a porta potty. This was 10 to 15 minutes to go in a very nice situation. Now, once you're on the course, the bathroom situation is different. There's definitely not enough bathrooms for all the runners, and every time I passed the bathroom, there was already like 6, 7, 8 people waiting to go in, the single porta potty that would be at each wine stop. So I, like basically every other person that was running, just went pee in the vineyards, okay? Everyone does it. Everyone does it. Now, if you're a guy, you can pee literally anywhere, but if you are a woman, I would recommend looking for the vineyards that are running parallel to the roads you're running on. And that's because the parallel vineyards mean that you're gonna have a little more privacy than the ones that are running perpendicular. Yeah, perpendicular, everyone can just look right up that alley and go, oh, she's peeing. Parallel, you're good, you're good. The very next thing I did while I was at the starting area was find the sweeper bus, okay? This race has kind of an iconic sweeper bus, and that they've genuinely attached a bunch of brooms. They're very literal about sweeping up the runners. And then I got in line for the start. I tried to get up as much as I could. I was running alone, so it was a bit easier just to kind of weave my way through the crowd to get closer to the start. But it was such a fun start, aside from the fact that there were all sorts of people, you know, watching the runners and lined up along just to see all the costumes go by. There were also all these aerial artists above you who were just doing cool tricks and performing, and it was such a party. And then you hit the start and you're running and you're feeling good and you're running and you're like, this is awesome, for like half a kilometer, quarter of a mile. Yeah, at that point you do kind of crowd up, and there's not like you're stopping for something in particular. It is just that the streets in this village are very tiny and there are thousands of runners trying to get through at the same time. So there's a bottleneck, and everything I've read is that this bottleneck happens every single year. So be prepared to walk for about 5 minutes at the start. And once you're through that bottleneck though, you are good to go, unless you stop at the first wine stop. The first wine stop once again had a bottleneck, but luckily that one kind of detoured from the road, so it was possible to keep going straight and just skip it entirely. And as I said, always skip the first stop. Now let's chat about the wine. I'm not a wine connoisseur. I'm not the most knowledgeable about wines, but I have taken some wine classes in my life, so I'm not unknowledgeable. And I can also take photos of wine bottles and look up the prices later. And I used that handy trick called Google to tell you that most of the wines we were being served were $30 to $70 a bottle, which is wild to me. By the 15th wine stop, they could have been just serving the worst wine in the world and no one would have noticed, but they weren't. They were not skimping on the wine. Chateau Lafite is the most famous of the vineyards. It's actually considered one of the more expensive wines in the world, with their like first grape varieties selling for like $20,000. But they were not giving us the first grapes. I didn't get a picture of this bottle, but I believe it was like a third grape variety that's like $70 a bottle. A lot of these stops also had photo opportunities with their bottles of wine and their boxes, and that was a really fun opportunity to get to pose with all these gorgeous chateaus in the background. And now we also must talk about the food. The food during this race was amazing. Yes, there are the oysters that everybody talks about, which were cool. I'd never had oysters before. I tried my very first one. I honestly didn't love it, but other people who had tried oysters were all saying they were great. So I guess if you're an oyster person, yeah, they're really good oysters. If you're not an oyster person, I mean, they're oysters. Also with the oysters is when the wine switched to white wine. And then there was the steak, which I really did enjoy, kind of like washed the palate down after the oysters. There was also cotton candy. I never knew cotton candy and red wine was such a great combo, but it is. There was also a lot of like traditional cakes and meats and sausages that were served along the course. Of course, with the traditional marathon snacks, you know, you could get bananas, you could get crackers, you could get bread. All of that was being served throughout the race at every single wine stop, just to make sure that the runners were, you know, remembering this is a wine marathon, but it's a marathon. And you could also get water at all of these stops. The very last food stop of the entire race was popsicles, which was honestly super refreshing. And then you cross the finish line. And here's the thing about the finish line. Once you're through that finish line, you get a rose, another bottle of wine, a really nice bag, and a plastic cup. And that plastic cup you bring into the finisher's tent and they will fill with beer. Because, you know, why not have more booze? Now let's talk about the course itself. Beyond the wine and beyond, you know, the costumes and how amazing it all is, the course itself is a very hilly course. And it's also not entirely road and it's not entirely trail. I would say it's a mix of about 50-50. A lot of the vineyards had kind of dirt paths, they were a little rocky, but then you would still go onto the roads to the cities and you dealt with cobblestones. So it honestly felt like every single type of road material that you could run on, you ran on in this race, which, to be honest, you don't really notice them again after that much wine. The weather as well is something that can really depend on the year. You know, 2023, the weather was almost 100 degrees, but in 2024, the weather was mostly overcast and it was cool and it was perfect for running, and then every now and then the sun would come out and I'd be like, oh, this is too hot. But then thank God the sun would go away again, and then at one point it just started downpouring for about like 5 minutes. And you just got absolutely soaked. But that also left. So we really, you know, 2024, every single type of weather during this race. Okay, let's talk about the crowds and the costumes. Now, because everybody is in costume, this actually becomes quite an event for the entire community to come out to. I'm talking, you know, children, adults, grandparents. I saw some people who set up like these whole picnics along the side of the road just to watch all the costumes and the runners going by. The little kids who were cheering also had their own costumes on to match the theme. It was honestly such an adorable community event that I feel like I haven't seen even in normal marathons. People have not come out in such a way to support a race, and it was so much fun to watch. You can tell that this community is really proud that they are the ones who created this event. So of course I had an amazing race, but does that mean I had no regrets? No, I did have regrets. And that regret was one thing that I did wrong, and that was not bringing a portable phone charger. I was trying to just capture so much of what was happening, and I was using up my battery, and there's also very little service in this area. So when your phone's constantly trying to find some service, it's gonna drain battery even faster. I was able to go into a restaurant after the race and charge my phone up, but I still, during the race, had to put my phone on airplane mode at like the halfway mark just to try and save the battery as best I could. So if you're interested in running this race in 2025 or any other wine race with you or with your running club, please reach out. I'm a travel agent for runners, and my whole goal is to make running in Europe more accessible for Americans looking to explore the world. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Thank you.